dishes were still warm when Rachel heard Megan on the stairs. Not running, not stomping. Just the specific weight of her daughter's footsteps. The deliberate, unhurried descent of someone who had made a decision before they started moving. Rachel knew those footsteps the way she knew the sound of her own heartbeat, which was to say she rarely thought about them consciously and registered every deviation instantly. She turned from the sink. Megan was 23 and had the look she got when she'd been working up to something. Not anger, something quieter than anger. The look of someone who had prepared a sentence and was deciding whether to say it. Rachel waited. Megan said, "Can I say something without you going somewhere?" Rachel dried her hands. "Going somewhere," she said. "You know what I mean," Megan said. "The thing where you leave." Not the room, just somewhere inside. And then you're there, but you're not there. Rachel held the dish towel. She wanted to say, "I don't do that." She could feel the sentence right there, available. The defensive reflex as practiced as breathing. She said, "Okay, say it." Megan looked at the counter. She said, "I don't know how to talk to you about real things. I try and I can see the moment you close, and then I'm just talking at a door." She looked up. "I don't know if that's something I did or something that's just true, but I needed to say it." The kitchen was the kitchen, the clean counter, the stacked dishes, the particular evening light. Nothing had changed. Everything was different. Rachel said, "I hear you." Megan looked at her. She said, "Do you?" And Rachel, who was very good at saying the right things, had no answer for that. Some things get inherited without anyone handing them over. If you've ever opened your mouth to say something to someone you love and heard your own mother's voice come out, subscribe before we keep going. This is that kind of story. Rachel Morrow was 47 years old and had spent a significant portion of those years being certain she was different from her mother. She had a therapist, which her mother had never had. She'd read books, the kind her mother would have found unnecessary, the kind about emotional language and attachment, and the things that get passed between generations like furniture nobody decided to keep, but nobody got around to throwing out. She'd talked about feelings, when feelings were available and the situation permitted. She'd done the work. She'd told herself this, with the specific confidence of someone who'd checked the boxes and moved on. She worked as a project manager for an architecture firm downtown, which suited the specific quality of her mind, the ability to hold multiple variables, to anticipate complications before they arrived, to keep the surface of things orderly while managing what was underneath. She was good at it in a way that had never surprised her, because it was the same thing she'd been doing her whole life with her interior world. Managing, containing, making the structure hold. She'd raised Megan mostly alone, a choice, finally, after a marriage that had been wrong from the beginning and had taken 4 years to admit. Megan had been 3 when they separated. She'd grown up watching her mother be efficient and capable and reliably present in every practical way. She'd grown up watching her mother be, in certain specific and important ways, absent while present. Rachel had not seen this. She had a mother of her own, of course, Helen, who was 71 and lived 3 hours away in the suburb where Rachel had grown up, in a house that was always orderly, in which conversations had always moved smoothly around the edges of anything difficult without touching the center. Helen had not been unkind. Rachel had never thought of her as unkind. She'd been there, all the dinners, all the school events, all the sick days, the whole sustained presence of a mother who kept the structure intact. The structure had been intact. Rachel had grown up feeling, in ways she'd never fully articulated even to the therapist, like she was slightly outside her own home. Like warmth was something that happened to other families, and her family had a very good approximation of it. She'd promised herself Megan would not feel this. She was standing in the kitchen at 47 with a dish towel in her hands, and she did not know whether she'd kept that promise. Megan was still at the kitchen table. Rachel turned off the faucet. She sat down. She sat across from her daughter and held the dish towel in her lap and looked at Megan, who was looking at the table. She said, "Tell me what it looks like when I close." Megan looked up. "You're asking me to describe it?" she said. "Yes." Megan thought about it. She said, "It's not like you get angry or go cold. It's subtler. You keep talking, but the talking gets careful, like you're choosing every word for weight. And then the thing I was trying to say becomes something manageable instead of something real." She held the table. "I stop trying usually, because I can feel the conversation already going somewhere that isn't where I started." Rachel held the dish towel. She thought, "I know exactly what she means." She thought, "Because I learned it." She thought, "I learned it from someone who was doing it, so it felt like the weather and not like a choice." She said, "I do it." Megan looked at her. "I know I do it," Rachel said. "I can't always feel myself doing it, but I know it happens." She held the towel. I think I learned how to make things manageable as a way of surviving something, and now I can't always tell the difference between what needs to be managed and what just needs to be felt." Megan held the table. She said, "Your mom." "My mom," Rachel said. The room was quiet in the specific way of a room where something true has been said and both people are deciding what to do with it. Rachel said, "She's coming Friday." Megan looked at her. "I know," she said. "The visit had been arranged 3 weeks ago." Helen was coming for 5 days, which was the length of time she usually stayed when she came. The length of time that Helen and Rachel had found was what they could manage together. Not too short to be insulting, not long enough to reach the things they never reached. Rachel had been preparing for it in the usual way, which was to say she'd been managing her expectations downward and keeping the structure available and planning meals at specific times so there would always be something to do. She said, "It's not going to be easy." Megan said, "I know." She doesn't know she doesn't," Rachel said. "The thing. The closing. I don't think she knows. I didn't know I was doing it until you just told me." She held the towel. "That's part of what's hard. She's not doing anything to me. She's just being who she is." "And you're angry at her anyway," Megan said. Rachel held the towel. "Yes," she said. "I'm angry at her anyway." Megan held the table. She said, "I'm not angry at you." Rachel looked at her. "I'm frustrated," Megan said. "And I miss you, which sounds strange because you're right here, but sometimes I miss the you that I can't access." She held the table. "I don't want to be angry at you. I want to figure out how to reach you." Rachel held the dish towel. She thought, "She's doing exactly what I could never do." She thought, "She's saying the thing instead of swallowing it." She thought, "Where did she learn that?" "Not from me," She said, "I'm glad you said it. What you said just now." "All of it." Megan looked at her. "I mean it," Rachel said. "I know I haven't made it easy to say things. I'm glad you said them anyway." Megan held the table. She said, "What do you want to do about it?" Rachel held the towel. She said, "I don't know yet, but I want to stop." She held it. "I want to stop bossing it. The thing. I've been carrying it from somewhere, and I've been giving it to you without meaning to, and I want to stop." Megan looked at her. She said, "Okay." Just that. A beginning, not a resolution. The beginning of something that would take longer than one kitchen conversation. But a beginning. Helen arrived on a Friday afternoon with her rolling suitcase and the careful quality she always had when she arrived somewhere, surveying the space before she engaged with the person, the way someone walks into a room they're not sure of. Rachel hugged her. Helen hugged back, the brief, firm hug she'd always given, the one that communicated, "I am here, I am glad, this is the form my gladness takes." Megan came out of her room and said hello. Helen touched Megan's arm, which was her version of an embrace. Megan received it with a warmth that Rachel noticed, the specific warmth Megan had always had for Helen that Rachel had found over the years both lovely and slightly painful. "You look well," Helen said to Megan. "You too, Grandma," Megan said. Helen looked at the apartment. She said, "The kitchen light on the left is flickering." Rachel said, "I know. I'm going to change the bulb." "It's bad for your eyes," Helen said. "I know," Rachel said. They had dinner. The conversation moved through the usual territory. Helen's neighbor who'd had a health scare, the drive down and whether the construction on Route 9 was finished yet, Megan's work at the design studio and whether she was getting enough sleep. Rachel listened and contributed and kept the structure intact. The first 2 days had the shape they always had. Helen reorganized one cabinet in the kitchen without asking, which Rachel discovered and did not comment on. Helen made coffee in the mornings before anyone else was up, and left it in the pot without note or ceremony, which was a thing she'd been doing Rachel's whole life and which was, Rachel understood, love in the form available. Helen watched the evening news with the sound slightly lower than she liked because she'd noticed it bothered Megan. Rachel noticed Helen doing this and did not mention it. They orbited each other in the practiced way of people who've been doing it for decades. On the third evening, Rachel woke at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and heard something as she passed the guest room. She stopped. The door was not fully closed. Helen's voice, low and halting, in the specific register of someone talking to themselves or to no one, working through something in the dark. Rachel stood in the hallway without moving. She heard, "I don't know how to say it." A long pause. "I've never known how to say it." Another pause, longer. "Rachel." Just the name. Just the beginning of something that hadn't found the rest. Then quiet. The light under the door went off. Rachel stood in the hallway. She stood there for a long time after. She thought about the name said in the dark, the way it held everything that hadn't been said for 47 years, all the conversations they'd circled without entering, all the times Helen had been right there and somehow unreachable, all the times Rachel had wanted something she didn't have words for and had learned, gradually, to stop wanting it. She thought about Megan at the kitchen table. Sometimes I miss the you I can't access. She thought about herself at every age she'd ever been, standing at the edge of her mother and not knowing how to cross it. She thought, she's been standing at the same edge. She thought, she just never found the words either. She went back to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about transmission, about the things that move through families without anyone deciding to move them, about the specific emotional vocabulary that gets inherited, the particular shape of silence that becomes the shape of home. She'd been so certain she'd broken it. She'd been so certain she was different. She thought, I learned not to say things from someone who never learned to say things. She thought, and Megan learned it from me. She thought, unless I stop it. She thought, I could stop it. She didn't sleep. In the morning, she made breakfast. Helen was already up in the kitchen, making coffee. Megan came down later, in the tentative way she moved in the mornings before she was fully awake. They ate. The conversation was the usual kind. The coffee was good, the eggs were good, the weather outside was doing the October thing. And then Rachel said, Mom? Helen looked at her. I was up last night, Rachel said. I heard you. Helen held her cup. She didn't say anything. Rachel said, I heard you trying to say something. Helen held the cup. She said, I wasn't. I do that sometimes. I think out loud when I can't sleep. I know, Rachel said. I heard my name. The kitchen was very quiet. Megan held her cup and didn't move. Helen held her cup and looked at the table in the way she looked at things when she was somewhere else while being entirely present. She said, I've been trying to figure out how to say something to you for... She stopped. For a long time. Rachel held her hands on the table. She said, You can say it wrong. You don't have to get it right. Helen looked at her. I wasn't... Helen started. She stopped. She started again. I wasn't warm. I know that. I know it's what you... I know it's a thing you've carried. That I wasn't. She held the cup. I didn't know how to be warmer. I know that sounds like an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's just, I didn't have it to give. Or I had it, and I couldn't find the door to it. She held the cup. I've thought about that for years. Rachel held the table. She said, I know. Helen looked at her. I know you don't have excuses, Rachel said. I'm not looking for them. She held the table. I've been angry at you for making me like this. And then Megan told me... She stopped. She looked at Megan. Megan told me that I do the same thing to her. Helen was very still. Rachel said, I thought I was different. I spent so long trying to be different. She held the table. And I'm not. Not all the way. Helen held the cup. She said, I'm sorry. The words were small. They didn't fix anything. They were also the first time Helen had said them in 47 years of being Rachel's mother, and they landed with the specific weight of things said for the first time. Rachel held the table. She said, I know you are. Megan said, I want to say something. They both looked at her. Megan held her cup. She said, I'm not angry at either of you. I want that to be clear. She held the cup. But I've been watching you, both of you, and it's like you're separated by something that neither of you made, but both of you are living inside. She held the cup. and I don't want to inherit it. The kitchen was very quiet. Helen looked at her granddaughter. She said, "What does that mean?" "Not inheriting it." Megan thought about it. She said, "It means I want to be able to tell my mom when something is hard and have her stay in the room. And I want her to be able to do that because she learned it somewhere, not because she's white-knuckling it." She held the cup. "And I think that starts with you two." Rachel looked at her daughter. She thought, she's 23, and she's seeing something neither of us could see at any age. She thought, she's the end of the line. Or she's the place where it stops. She said, "What would it look like if we started something different?" Helen held her cup. She said, "I don't know." "Neither do I," Rachel said. Megan held her cup. She said, "Maybe it looks like this, right now. This breakfast where we're actually talking instead of talking around things." Helen looked at the table. She said, "My mother, your great-grandmother, never once told me she loved me. She said it without drama, without weight, the way you say a fact you've held for so long, it doesn't have edges anymore. I don't say that to blame her. She was a certain kind of person in a certain kind of time, but I grew up not knowing how to say it either. It was like the word didn't connect to anything that felt real." She held the cup. "I love you, Rachel. I've loved you your whole life. I don't know if you've known that." Rachel held the table. She said, "I've known it and not known it." Helen said, "What does that mean?" Rachel thought about it. She said, "I've known it the way I know the house is there when I'm not looking at it. I know it exists. I've spent a lot of time wishing I could see it." Helen held the cup. She said, "I'm sorry I made it hard to see." Rachel said, "I made it hard too." From Megan, she held the table. "I think I was so careful not to be my mother that I became a very controlled version of my mother. Which is just the same thing with more self-awareness." Megan made a small sound. Rachel looked at her. Megan was almost smiling, the complicated smile of someone who finds something accurate and also painful. "You're funny when you're honest," Megan said. "I'm trying it," Rachel said, "being honest." "Keep going," Megan said. Helen looked at Megan. She said, "What do you want?" "From us, if you could have it be different." Megan held her cup. She said, "I want breakfast like this more often, where we're not managing each other." She held the cup. "I don't need it to be easy. I know it's not going to be easy. I want to try to get somewhere instead of staying in the same orbit." Helen held the cup. She said, "I can try." She said it simply, without the performance of certainty. Just, "I can try." The acknowledgement of someone who understood the distance and was willing to start moving. Rachel said, "Me too." The rest of the morning moved in the way mornings moved when something has shifted, but the ordinary world continues requiring ordinary things. Helen refilled her coffee. Megan got up to find her phone. Rachel cleared the plates, but the clearing felt different. She was different while doing it. She stood at the sink and rinsed the plate and thought about the hallway at 2 a.m. The thin line of light under the door, her mother's voice in the dark, reaching for a word she couldn't find. She turned around. Helen was at the table, still with her coffee, looking at the window. Rachel said, "Mom." Helen looked at her. Rachel said, "Thank you for trying last night, even in the dark." She held the plate. "I know you didn't think I hurt. I hurt." Helen held a cup. She said, "I've been trying to say it for years." "I know," Rachel said. "It's hard," Helen said. The saying. "I know," Rachel said. "I have the same problem." Helen held the cup. She said, "You're better at it than me." "I've had help," Rachel said. She looked at the doorway where Megan had been. "I'm still learning." Helen looked at her daughter. She said, "You turned out well." It was a simple sentence, the kind of sentence that had a whole world in it that both of them could feel and neither would fully articulate. Rachel said, "Thank you." She went back to the sink. She held the plate under the water. She thought about Megan in the kitchen 3 nights ago, saying the thing instead of swallowing it. She thought about what it had taken for a 23-year-old to say, "I don't know how to talk to you about real things." She thought, "She's braver than I was at her age." She thought, "She's braver than I've been at most ages." She thought, "I want to be worth the bravery." The next 2 days of the visit were not transformed. Helen still reorganized the pantry slightly. Rachel still responded to emotional things with efficiency. Megan still sometimes caught herself translating what she was trying to say into something manageable before she said it. But things were different in the incremental way that things are different when the people in them have decided to try. On the last evening, they sat in the living room, all 3 of them, which was unusual. Usually Helen watched the news, and Rachel did the last things, and Megan went to her room, and they gathered at the edges of each other without quite gathering. They were in the same room, not talking about anything significant. A show Helen had found that Megan also watched. A conversation about a show that became a conversation about something Megan had been thinking about, something she'd been figuring out, and she said it without first editing it into something manageable. Rachel listened. She stayed in the room, which was all it required. "Just staying," Helen said at one point in response to something Megan described. "I worried about that at your age, that exact thing." And Megan looked at her grandmother and said, "What did you do about it?" And Helen thought for a moment and said, "I ignored it." Which is not advice. And Megan laughed, the real kind, and Helen's face did the thing it did when she thought something was worth smiling at, which was barely visible and entirely genuine. Rachel watched her mother and her daughter find something she hadn't known was available to them. She thought she could do it all along. She just needed someone to meet her. She thought, "I could have met her sooner." She thought, "She could have met me." She thought, maybe that's the whole lesson. Everyone is waiting for someone to meet them, and sometimes you have to be the one who goes first. Helen left Sunday morning. She packed efficiently and came out of the guest room with her suitcase and the specific quality of someone who has done this visit many times and knows its shape. She hugged Megan, the brief, firm hug, and Megan held on for a second longer than usual, and Helen didn't pull away. She hugged Rachel. The hug lasted a moment longer than it usually did. Neither of them said anything about this. At the door, Helen turned around. She said, "I'll call when I'm home." Rachel said, "Okay." Helen said, Rachel. Rachel looked at her. Helen said, "Thank you for this weekend. For what you let happen." Rachel held the door frame. She said, "Thank you for trying in the dark." Helen looked at her. Her face did the thing again, the almost visible thing, the barely there quality of emotion in a face that had learned early to contain it. She said, "I'll work on the trying." "So will I," Rachel said. Helen went down the hall. Rachel closed the door. She stood in the entryway. Megan was behind her, somewhere in the apartment. She said, "Mom." Rachel turned. Megan was in the kitchen doorway. She said, "That was different." Rachel said, "Yes." Megan said, "Good different." "I hope so," Rachel said. Megan held the door frame. She said, "How do you feel?" Rachel thought about it. She said, "Strange, like something loosened that I'd stopped noticing was tight." Megan held the door frame. She said, "Is that good?" Rachel said, "I think it's the beginning of good." They stood in the apartment for a moment. The Sunday morning was doing the thing it did, the particular quality of light, the specific quiet. Megan said, "Do you want to make coffee?" Rachel said, "Yes." They went to the kitchen. They made coffee. They sat at the table. They didn't talk about anything important. They were just in the same room, at the same table, in the ordinary Sunday morning way of people who are figuring out how to be together. Which was, Rachel thought, exactly what being together was. She held her cup. She thought about the chain of it, her grandmother, whoever her grandmother had been, and whatever she'd carried. Helen. Rachel. Megan. The specific inheritance of emotional language, or the lack of it, passing down through the generations like a trait no one chose and everyone embodied. She thought, it stops here. Not perfectly, not all at once. She knew she would close again some days. She knew the next hard conversation would still require effort she hadn't fully developed. She knew there were years of habit in her body that didn't change because she'd decided they would. But she'd heard her mother's voice in the dark. And she'd stayed at the breakfast table instead of taking the conversation somewhere manageable. And Megan was sitting across from her with her coffee in the Sunday morning light, in the specific ease of someone who had said a hard thing and been received. That was something. That was, Rachel thought, the whole beginning. If any part of this stayed with you, if you recognized the silence or the breakfast or the thing in the dark that never found the words, leave something in the comments. Tell me what you'd say to someone if you stopped trying to say it right. Tell me what got past to you that you're trying not to pass further. Sometimes, just deciding to try is the whole thing. The silence doesn't end all at once. But it can end, one breakfast at a time, one honest sentence at a time, one moment of staying in the room instead of going somewhere else. That's how it stops. That's how you become the place where it stops.